Stop it. Hi everyone, a literal 5-year-old here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this self-titled album from Zeal and Ardor. For the uninitiated, Zeal and Ardor is an avant-garde metal band spearheaded by Swiss-American songwriter and multi-instrumentalist Manuel Gagnou, whose work started creating a buzz around 2016 when people began stumbling across what would be his breakout album, which was super rough around the edges production-wise, but still, a lot of listeners, including myself, were blown away by the fact that this was a legit music project fusing together elements of black metal and slave spirituals, which, again, unlikely combination, but absolutely no joke, especially as Manuel went on to release the record Stranger Fruit in 2018, a project that in a lot of ways was working off the same basic premise, but brought its full potential to bear. Like, not only was the production on this thing heavy and crushing and colorful and dynamic, but on top of that, the way these gospel and blues and soul-inspired vocals just soared over these sinister black metal chord progressions. It sounded so good it should have been illegal. And that's before even getting into the ways this record creatively explored themes of societal racism and bigotry, the fears and horrors of living that experience, especially in a pre-civil rights era. So yeah, in my opinion, this thing was one of the best records of that year, easily. It was eventually followed up with the Wake of a Nation EP, which featured tracks in response to the police brutality and the death of George Floyd, which sparked global protests in 2020. And as good as Zeal and Ardor has been so far, I just had this feeling that, you know, maybe things are just getting started. The best is yet to come, because there's so much creative potential in the genre fusions that Manuel brings to the table through this project, especially on a self-titled record where this might be an opportunity for Zeal and Ardor to really perfect or define their sound ultimately. However, after multiple listens, I have to say I think this is the weakest offering this band has brought to the table thus far, and by a pretty wide margin too. So I feel this way for a couple key reasons, starting with the vocals. Man, the singing on Zeal and Ardor's last record was so fucking good, with Manuel much of the time sounding like a vengeful, fire and brimstone type preacher barking like a demon dog, sometimes digging down into the guttural growl range of like a Tom Waits. The soulful cleans on this LP were great, as were the traditional black metal style vocals as well, the singing just proficient all around. Now, I think the vocal approach on this new LP is in a similar ballpark, but it's changed enough to where I think the tone of the music, of the performances, is noticeably different. There are moments on this thing where I feel like Manuel isn't so much plugging directly into these melodic phrasings coming from blues or from spirituals, and it sounds more like a dude trying to aggressively croon his way through a bad Eddie Vedder impression. I'm a golden liar. Weirdly enough, there's a lot of nu metal camp on this record as well that I don't think goes over all that great, like the muttered intro vocals on the track I Caught You, which sounds like something off of an early Korn record, maybe even Limp Bizkit. Like, in a way, I can hear what Manuel is going for on this LP, but it still comes off like an aesthetic misfire. Like the song Bow, for example, which I think continues to walk down the group's unique bridge between spirituals and metal music, and does so with pounding drums and relatively haunting background vocals. Some huge hits of gurgling bass distortion as well, but it all builds up into this rockin' outro with a massive group refrain. Bow down to the American way. Bow down to the American way. Which, given Zeal and Ardor's history, is obviously said in a mocking way. Like, the messaging on this track is coming from a good place. Don't cry for the weak and neglected, go blind in the cage we erected, stand tall with the rage of a storm now, kill hope for the age cause we know how. Like, this systematic cycle of violence and oppression and then outrage that the track is painting lyrically is accurate and quite horrifying. Instrumentally and even vocally at points, it feels like the thing it is satirizing. It sounds like what it's trying to attack. I think I could blast parts of this song at a Trump rally and like it would get the fists pumping. There's also the track Golden Liar, which was a lead single to this thing, where the lonely, rustic electric guitars and the whistling in the background combined with the overly passionate lead vocals it just sounds like a music bed for a pickup truck commercial. Even more absurdly out of bounds is the track Immersion, which doesn't really provide much else other than the silly contrast between these totally throttling, aggressive, heavily compressed black metal passages and these glistening little beats that sound like the start of a freaking Owl City song. And this is not the only part on this record where the band's once thrilling genre combinations now feels like a zany switcheroo that you might get on a record that Mike Patton is on. But in this instance, it doesn't quite land, like the song JMB, where suddenly we start getting all of these weirdly slick and sweet prog jazz guitar passages. Then there's the instrumental closer, which legitimately sounds like slowed and reverbed Linkin Park from the 2000s. Generally, I think a lot of the riffs on this thing have drifted away from the harmonic and melodic nuances of the black metal that has consistently inspired Zeal and Ardor up until this point. And don't get me wrong, like, that genre is still here at points in notes. Like, you can pick up on it on the song Hold Your Head Low. Maybe that's the biggest and most shining example here. But again, this isn't how the drum and guitar work plays out on this LP much of the time. A lot of tracks on this thing just feature the overly compressed, regimented chunkiness that you might get on the guitars from an industrial metal record. You can hear it on the song Feed the Machine. Things even get a little genty, I would say, on the song Death to the Holy. And while this isn't the worst thing in the world, I think it's a more one-dimensional move, especially since on this LP, it leads to a lot of basic, forgettable, generic binary riffs. Now, I also want to quickly mention the overt Satanism on this LP, which generally in metal music I don't have an issue with. There's a lot of satanically themed metal tracks and LPs that I love, that I hold near and dear. In fact, it's not really a new topic for this project. It's cropped up on previous records and tracks, but I can say in regards to past works, there was at least like layers to it, or it played into a larger narrative, or its incorporation was subtler. Whereas on Church Burns, for example, it doesn't really seem to be informed by anything else other than the edge. It's just a very thinly veiled attempt at being like a provocateur, I guess. Ooh, I'm such a naughty boy burning this church. God's gonna be mad at you. Sure, you could say this track does have a very visceral performance, and pairing this kind of messaging with a vocal style that is at least somewhat gospel-inspired, that does bring something to the table. But I'd argue not as much as Stranger Fruit did, which maybe brings me to my biggest general issue with this LP, and it's that it feels like a simpler, louder, but also more watered down version of what I've enjoyed from this project in the past. Sure, this thing does feature some very aggressive, noisy, and hard-hitting moments here and there, but my enjoyment doesn't really extend past the thrill of hearing these parts maybe for a couple of times, and then their, impact wears off just a bit. Pushing past that, there's very little about the writing, both lyrically and melodically, the song structuring, the genre combinations, or even, in a lot of ways, the production that I'm all that crazy about. And once again, the record is packed with these moments that feel almost zany, a little cringy, kind of random in a way that's working against the darkness and evil and mystique that it's obviously trying to portray in its more serious and more legitimate spots. So yeah, unfortunately, as much as I have enjoyed Zeal and Ardor stuff in the past, this record just did not do it for me at all. Like, on the whole, I didn't really enjoy this, not even like a little. Feeling a light to decent 4 on this one, Tran. Zishin, have you given this record a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head, it's another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Zeal and Ardor, forever.